Hi everybody, my name is Nick Joystick. I teach virtual production at Drexel University, and in this video we're going to continue where we started in our previous video, which is linked in the description. We already have this joystick set up in LiveLink using a virtual subject blueprint. So now when the joystick is moved, we get these property values that are updating. So in this video, we're going to pick up where we left off and now work on using these joystick values to update the lens length, the focal length of a CineCamera for virtual production in Editor. So this will be fundamentally two steps. We're going to first set up the LiveLink blueprint so that it is writing new values to the focal length based on the joystick being pushed forward and pulled backward. And then our second step is really to apply that information to a CineCamera in our level. So one other little caveat here is that our joystick, when I pull it back all the way, it's going towards 0, and it's, about 0.2-ish. And when I push it all the way forward, it goes a little beyond 0.8. So, overall, our range is 0 to 1, back to forward. So if I'm going to increase and decrease focal length, I want to attenuate this as well, so that, basically we can go from -1 to +1. And so we'll be using a float curve for that. So let's get started with this. We'll take a look at the blueprint first. And before we did all of these actions on the initialize event. So we set up our blueprint data that have static and frame data, and we bound some events to the virtual camera input system to update index 0 and index 1 of our property values. And so that's where the joystick data is going into. We're going to use index 0 for adjusting our lens length. In all of this, we never really touched the event on update. So we're going to use this as our trigger, really, to calculate a new focal length on our camera blueprint data based on this index 0 array. So let's get this set up first. We'll pull from our blueprint frame data, and our first step, of course, is going to be to set a new value for the focal length. So I'm going to release and just choose, without even typing in anything, I'm just going to set members in LiveLink camera frame data. And then here we have got our checkboxes for what we're going to set our values to. And so I'm just only really going to expose focal length. So we have nothing exposed now, and I activate focal length, and now we can insert a value into focal length. And I'm going to want to base the new value on the starting point of the current value. So I'll pull from frame data again, release, and we'll break that out. And in this case, I'm going to want my property values, and I'm going to want my focal length. I don't need anything else, so I'm just going to uncheck everything else and even transform. Okay, so here now I'll be able to read the starting values, and then we'll update our focal length. Let's go ahead and connect our execution pins so we don't forget that. And once we've finished updating this, we'll want to broadcast our data, the output of this, to the editor so that it can start applying that data to actors. So let's go ahead and finish this. I'm going to pull the execution pin here, and I'll type in the word update. And somewhere here, there should be a LiveLink section. And this is what we want: update virtual subject frame data. So this function will now update the frame data, and then Unreal can broadcast that LiveLink data out to the rest of the editor. So we just want to take our structure output and connect that as the frame data that we want to broadcast. All right, so now that we've got our event chain set up, we'll just set up some logic for adjusting this focal length. So we'll begin with reading out our property value 0. So we'll just pull this out and say get, and we want to get a reference, and by default it's 0, so that's the data we want. So there's our floating point. But again, this is going to be in a range of 0 to 1, and we'd like that to be in a range of -1 to +1. So what we'll do is we'll use a float curve to translate this into our values, because besides wanting this to go from -1 to 1, we also want a little bit of dead space, right? So here, when the joystick is not being touched, we're not always precisely at 0.5. And so anything that is resulting in a non-zero value is going to start, adjusting our focal length. So we want a curve that will not only run from -1 to 1, but also have a flat plateau at 0 in the range of, say, 0.4 to 0.6 or something like that. So let's set up this curve. Right here in our content browser, I'll just right click and go to miscellaneous and choose a curve. And we'll do a curve float, a select. And I'll give this a name of VCS, since this is our virtual camera system joystick. And I'll call this response curve. Okay. Let's do a save all just to make sure everybody's happy. And finally, I'll adjust this curve. Double click, and here's our curve. So input values are in X and output values are in Y, vertical. So I can just middle mouse click here at 0, it sets a keyframe there, and another one here at 1. I'm just reading 0 to 1, and those are my input values. So the y-axis is my output values, so I'm going to select this first key, and it's an input of 0, and I want an output of -1. And here is my other keyframe. I'll select that. Input value of 1, I want an output value of 1. Okay, great. So we've improved our, I'm just like mouse wheeling here or right mouse clicking to kind of navigate around. So now we should, whoops, it's 0.75 for some reason. Let's just make sure that is a 1. There we are. Okay, so now right here at 0.5, we cross at 0, but any non-0.5 value is going to give us something that is going to start making lens adjustments, and we don't want that. So I'm going to add some keys here to the middle. Let's see here. Let's just set a key here. I'm just middle mouse clicking and middle mouse clicking and middle mouse clicking. So 3 keys so that we can set a plateau. All of these I want to have a output value of 0. So I'll just select that, 0, and enter. So now we've got a flat plateau. Only thing is I'd like to ease in and out of this center area so that we can kind of accelerate the adjustment as we push the joystick further away from center. So I'm going to select this key and shift select this key, and let's give these a cubic interpolation. And for some reason this one didn't get that cubic. It says cubic, but oh, it's just on the output. So let's undo that. We'll set, okay, these are linear. So let's just start with this one, and I'm going to do broken keys. There we go. So this eases into our plateau, and select this one and broken key, and some, oh, okay, that's our problem, is these keys are not curved. So let's do this. There we go. We'll zoom out here. We don't want this to go past our 0 point, so that looks good. Now we're easing in, and let's do the same up here. So again, I'm just doing broken key, and again, I'm keeping an eye down here on the plateau because I don't want to go too far where the curve goes below 0. But this way, now you can see we ease out of the center and accelerate in to the end, the far range of what our joystick can do. All right, so now when our joystick is hanging out in values, say between, let's see, select this one, 0.4, it's going to end up at 0. At 0.6, it'll be at 0. And because I have this linear key in between set at 0, everything in between will be 0. So we've got a nice little plateau here. And then we've got negative values as we pull back on the joystick and positive values as we push forward. So we'll go ahead and save that, and we don't need the response curve anymore. We'll put that to use here in our blueprint as a variable. So we'll add the variable. I'll call this response curve. enter, and I'll click on the variable type, and we want to call this curve float. We want to curve float. There it is, curve float object type, and we'll want an object reference. Let me just maximize this for a second. We can't set a default yet, so we'll compile. And now we can set a default. I think I named that VCS response. So if I type in VCS, there it is. And so now we've got the curve selected and assigned in our variable, and I can drag it out, get that response curve. And then to use it, we just get a float value based on this curve, which will give us an opportunity to have an input value. So just type in get and float and get float value. Here's our input, and we're going to get our input based on our joystick value. And so there we go. This will translate our joystick value to a curve value. One last thing is, it might be nice to give the user the opportunity to adjust just how responsive this is. So let's have a multiplication factor. I'm going to add another variable. I'll call this zoom factor. And enter, and we just need a simple float here. And then I can drag that zoom factor out here. Get that. And we'll just multiply these two together. So drag from the return value, hit the star key, multiply, drag our zoom factor into there. They'll multiply by each other. Let me take my zoom factor. Can't set a default compile. Let's just set a default of 1. So it starts out by doing absolutely nothing. And finally, we'll add this to our existing focal length. So I'll just move my response curve out of the way, pull from my focal length, hit plus. There's my add. And we'll take this output and plug it in there. So a little zigzaggy, but you get the idea. Output goes to that'll be our new focal length. So yeah, that should do it. Now, one other little nice aspect of these LiveLink blueprints is that, let's say I compile this, here in LiveLink, those new variables are visible in this control panel. And notice that I didn't even set them to public, but because they are part of this LiveLink blueprint, they're available here. So once this blueprint is being used in LiveLink, the user can adjust that zoom factor here. And in theory, this should just work, right? So here I am with my Y value at 0.48. Nothing's happening to my focal length. In theory, if I push forward, look at that. I'm zooming in and pulling back, and I'm zooming out. So pretty cool. One last thing I want to do here while I'm at it is I've got 3 buttons across the top here that are not the red button. I'm going to save this for later. But these 3 buttons, maybe I want to be able to set to fixed focal lengths, right? So I can, if I want to get 35 millimeters, with the joystick's kind of hard. So how about we set these 3 buttons to 50 millimeter, how about 35, 50, and 80 millimeters? And so I can do that back here where we initialize our different events. Here we were, in the previous video, we were getting the axes of the controller to assign values to our property values. So what I can do is, instead of axis value, I can respond to essentially a key, a button. So it's a key press. So from our VCam input, I'm just going to drag off of that, and I'm going to say bind. And this time, instead of an analog event, I'm going to bind a key down event. And we'll pull this over here, and I'm going to need 3 of these. So I think, do I double click here? Yeah, there we go. We get a little extra pin here. So let's make 3 of these while we're at it. So I should be able to pull off of here and bind, key down, and pull off of here and bind, key down. All right, so now I've got 3 of these binding of key down events tied to my VCS. Let's make sure we actually execute every single one of these. And then we'll respond to the first 3 buttons across the top here. So these are generic controller buttons 1, 2, and 3. So key, generic button 1, generic button 2, and generic button 3. And so now each one of these is going to have its own custom event. So we'll delegate and custom event, and I'll name this VCS B1, and another one for custom event VCS B2, and just one more, and that'll be custom event VCS B3. Okay. Finally, we will just respond to each of these by setting a new focal length in our blueprint data. So let's go ahead over here and just pull off from our frame data, and I want to set a member, and let's just pull this over to here, and we're just going to set focal length. There it is. So double click so we have a spare little pin here. We'll execute off of button 1 and set it to 35. And so now I'll copy this, paste, and paste. And so off of button 2, we'll go to 50. And off of button 3, we'll go to 80. And finally, we want to make sure we connect our structure reference. So there's that one and that one. Okay, so now this should work. If I compile this, here we are at 36 millimeters. Click button 1, 35, button 2, 50, and button 3, 80. So there we go. We can pop to any of those lens lengths. We can zoom in, and then we can pop right back to something that we want to use. Okay, so maybe just one last little thing. What if we promote each of these as variables so that they can be added to here, and then the user can configure which 3 optional lens lengths they want to use. You know, maybe they want wider, maybe they want longer. So let's just promote each of these to a variable. Promote to variable. Focal length. I'll just call this, well, can I rename that? F2? There we go. Focal length 1. And drag that. Promote to variable. Focal length 2. And one more. Promote to variable. Focal length 3. And hopefully when we compile, do these have defaults based on what we had entered? Yes, they do. Look at that. You rock, Unreal. Okay, so now these are all in place, and because they are variables, then they are in our LiveLink. And so now we can set this. Let's say I wanted an 18 millimeter and a 100 millimeter. So now that those are all set, now my buttons will 18 millimeter for button 1, 100 millimeter. Look at that. All right. So this is really useful, except that we haven't really applied this to a camera yet. So let's get that going. Let's just save what we've got. Okay, so in order to apply this data to a CineCameraActor, we're going to use one more blueprint, and that's going to be an Editor Utility Actor blueprint. So back down here in our content, I'll right click and go to Editor Utilities and choose Editor Utility Blueprint. And from this list, I'm going to choose Editor Utility Actor. And we'll just give that a name of VCS, and I'll do underscore and EUA for Editor Utility Actor BP. And Control S to save. And double click. Okay, so this is an actor that we can drop into our level, but it works in Editor because it's an Editor Utility Blueprint. So we can have this editor receive data from LiveLink by adding a LiveLink controller. So we'll go here to Components, click Add, type in LiveLink controller, and we'll just leave that as is. And we'll go into our event graph. And so, you know, we're not even going to need any of these traditional events. I'm just going to select them all and delete. And let's just go full screen with this for a second. And so in order to respond to updates in the LiveLink data, we're just going to right click, add event, and choose on LiveLink updated. There we go. So now anytime we get new updated data through LiveLink, we'll get this triggered, fired. Again, back in our original blueprint, we are firing that event with this update virtual subject frame data. So this is going to fire that event in the editor, broadcast it out, and we just need to, well, evaluate that data. So I'll pull our execution pin, type in the word evaluate, and somewhere here we should have LiveLink, evaluate LiveLink frame. And here we'll set what subject do we tune into. Well, we're going to tune into our VCS, and the roll is a camera roll. Wonderful. The data coming off of this should be our frame data. So I could pull off of here, and sure enough, let's go ahead and break that blueprint data. And so there is, actually it's our full blueprint data. So we've got static and frame, and we actually don't even need the static data. We just want that frame data. And so let's break that. And the only thing we actually need here is the focal length. So I'll just deactivate everything else. There we are. And so this is going to be getting our new focal length every time that gets updated. So finally, we just want to update the focal length of a CineCameraActor in our level. We can do that by having a variable that will point to some CineCameraActors. So I'm going to add a new variable, and we'll call this CineCam. And we'll make sure that this is a CineCameraActor object reference. And so now we can drag that in and get that. In order to access the focal length, we're going to need the camera component. So I'll just drag off of here and say get CineCamera component. And with that, we can finally just say we want to set the focal length, set the current focal length. Did I just say get? Let's try this one more time. Set current focal length. Boom. There we go. Much better. And the current focal length is now going to be set to what we get in from our LiveLink. So we'll just connect this, and well, that ought to do it. Compile. Save it. Let's bring this window down. Let's drag this in. Let's close the blueprint and move this LiveLink out of the way. With this selected, I think we just need, we've got that somewhere in here. Oh, I forgot one really important thing. Going back into our Editor Utility Actor Blueprint, I did not make this public. So when I make it public, then we can have the user update it. So going here to Variables and make that public, compile, and now the user can select that camera. So let's go ahead and add a CineCameraActor. There it is. Pull back, E, rotate, angle down, and now we can see through that camera, and we want to select, there is our blueprint actor. We want to point that to our CineCamera. And that should be it. So in theory, if I select this, there is our CineCameraActor, and pick up my joystick, fingers crossed. Oh, look at that. We're zooming in, we're zooming out with the joystick in virtual production. And the nice thing is with Take Recorder, I can just record this camera actor and I'm just going to get the result. I feel like this is a little slow, so I'm going to go ahead and use that zoom factor here. And I'll just make that 2. And now I can zoom in faster and zoom out. Let's try 5. Ooh, there we go. So now I can zoom in and out really nicely. I can click my buttons to set fixed focal lengths, and we're doing this in Editor through LiveLink. So that's all great. I have one more video on this, and that's going to be to set up this red button. We want this red button to open Take Recorder and start and stop Take Recorder for us. So I will see you in the next video. It'll be linked in the description. Until then, have fun.